Hi everyone, let's have a look at some more of Wu's complaints.
Argument 6. The memory malleability argument to dismiss anecdotal evidence, stated as, memory is malleable and unreliable. The mind often fabricates memories and or edits them. Therefore, memory is not reliable evidence for paranormal claims.
Right, well, here's the thing. We're bombarded with sensory input all the time, and what the brain does is pick out some details and use imagination to fill in the blanks. The result is encoded and stored in the brain. That is, what's encoded is not a perfect representation. Then when we recall a memory, we once again apply imagination to help recreate the memory.
Two significant problems with this argument reveal that it's not only weak, but inapplicable as well, making it one of the least convincing of the skeptical arguments. 1. The main problem with this is that although memory isn't perfect and doesn't work like a tape recorder, the majority of what sane people remember is reliable and can be checked out and verified.
You know why? Because most of the events we remember are perfectly ordinary events that we experience over and over again.
2. Where memory tends to be unreliable the most is in the area involving details that the brain considers too insignificant to remember. Unfortunately for skeptics and debunkers, paranormal experiences don't fit into this category because they tend to be significant, shocking, and revealing.
This is simply false. The brain doesn't always ignore the insignificant. Sometimes it misses important things, but remembers the insignificant.
In fact, people describing shocking or traumatic events from long ago tend to say, "It was years ago, but I can still see it as if it were happening right now." These memories are often the same way years later as they were the day they occurred.
The memory? Perhaps, although I doubt it. Memories are known to change over time. But setting that aside, how do we verify that the memory matches the event? I mean, that's the only thing that actually matters here.
This means that the memory is consistent and reliable.
No, it means that people think so. Countless cases where people are found guilty of crimes because of eyewitness testimonies and later cleared by DNA evidence have shown that you're just wrong. If you were right, no such cases would exist.
You're confusing the memory being vivid, detailed, and or important with the memory being accurate. But you know what? This was actually the first argument you didn't misrepresent, I think. And well, that's nice. Instead, however, you dismissed it by ignoring everything we know about how the human memory works.
Argument 7. Automatic dismissal of paranormal claims is due to mistake, lying, or hallucination. Stated as, since paranormal phenomena is impossible, those who claim to have them must be mistaken, lying, or hallucinating.
And we're back to this promise.
The actual argument is that if we can't rule out mistakes, lies, hallucinations, etc., then the claim is unreliable. The way to rule out mistakes and so forth is by making claims that are empirically verifiable. That way, if you don't believe it, you can check.
Skeptics will continue to insist on one of these three categories even when such explanations do not fit the data or are far too unlikely.
And when has it ever been more likely that a paranormal event occurred than that a mistake was made? That's a genuine, honest question. How can you say that something is more or less unlikely than something you can't even show to be possible?
It's another example of where they prefer a false explanation over a paranormal one.
No, it's an example of where we don't accept an unsupported paranormal explanation when a natural explanation exists. What it really all comes down to is, what does the evidence support? And if it doesn't support the paranormal, then you don't believe in the paranormal. It's that simple.
A common fallacy these skeptics make is to assert that those who claim to have paranormal experiences do not consider other mundane explanations for their experience, and instead jump to paranormal conclusions. Well, that simply isn't true at all.
That's not a fallacy. Look, see that I'm counting factual errors and fallacies separately? Yeah, that's because they're two separate things.
In almost every story you read or hear about of a paranormal experience, the claimant almost always describes the possible mundane explanations that he/she considered and how they were ruled out before coming to their unconventional conclusion.
Right, and in most cases, in fact all that I've ever heard, they rely on reasoning such as, I know what I saw, thus immediately and without justification ruling out mistakes. This is an argument from self-knowing. If I were wrong, I'd know that. Also, failure to provide an alternative explanation does not constitute evidence of a paranormal one. That's the argument from ignorance fallacy.
What skeptics don't understand is, if the possible mundane explanations don't fit the facts or are too improbable to be believed, then they can and should be ruled out.
Name one case where all possible mundane explanations have been ruled out, including unknown ones. Even if you can eliminate all known mundane explanations, you have no evidence of the paranormal. You can't use the process of elimination when you don't know all possible alternatives.
Argument 8. There's no evidence for any paranormal or psychic phenomena. Pseudo-skeptics are always saying there's no evidence for any paranormal or psychic phenomena, no matter how much evidence is shown to them.
You're stating as fact how skeptics consistently behave in a situation that to my knowledge has never occurred. At best, that's a hasty generalization.
That's because this statement is a religion to them, not an objective statement.
It's not a religion, and it is an objective statement. I'm aware of no evidence is subjective, as it can be true for one person but false for another. There is no evidence is either true or false regardless of who makes the statement. It's objective.
So if you give them stories and experiences, even from credible sources, they will reject it as anecdotal and inadmissible as evidence.
How could stories and experiences presented by some source not be regarded as anecdotal evidence? That's the definition of anecdotal evidence.
If you give them scientific studies that show positive results for psi, they will argue that those studies did not have proper controls, since if they did, they'd only get chance results, or their fixed logic goes.
But there are no such studies that I'm aware of, and I don't see you presenting any.
Then when you show them replicated studies, for example Ganzfeld, they will raise the bar again.
My point exactly. That study didn't even hint at anything paranormal. It showed a statistical anomaly that to this day has not been fully explained. Unexplained does not mean paranormal. It means just that, unexplained.
You can never win because the conclusion has already been decided from the get-go. That's what makes these pseudo-skeptics dishonest and not what they claim at all.
Oh, the irony.
But the reality is that for some common paranormal phenomenon, such as ESP, there's plenty of long-standing evidence of both types, anecdotal and scientific. Controlled scientific experiments have yielded positive results for ESP for many years, from the 1930s with J.B. Rhine,
which was refuted after additional research was done,
to the current day with Dr. Charles Tart, Dr. Gary Schwartz, Rupert Sheldrake, and many other scientists. Positive and consistent results for psi have been found to exist far above chance under controlled conditions.
None of them have ever agreed to have their controversial claims tested under properly controlled conditions. Instead, they complain that they shouldn't have to, and that the bar should be lowered for them. They are incompetent scientists at best, and quite possibly frauds.
And theories of psi experiments that have been replicated for decades, known as the Ganzfeld experiment, Otto-Ganzfeld experiments, and PEER, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, have yielded statistically significant and consistent results above chance as well.
Again, these experiments don't even hint at anything paranormal. They show that something other than chance is at work, but not what that might be. Unexplained does not mean paranormal.
In addition, the anecdotal and experiential evidence is overwhelming.
That sentence was absolutely nonsensical. Overwhelming anecdotal evidence is an oxymoron.
Studies show that at least half the population of the world has had paranormal experiences. Common sense would tell you that if half the people in the world have experienced something, so you see the evidence for such common paranormal phenomena is huge.
No, I don't see it. You haven't even attempted to present anything even resembling evidence.
If you think that UFO evidence is strictly confined to obscure sightings, think again. The famous Bentwaters UFO incident that occurred on an American military base in England in 1980 involving 24 military witnesses, including Colonel Holt, of an up-close UFO sightings remains an undebunked and compelling case.
Can we get to the part where you present evidence of aliens as opposed to evidence of a failure to identify a flying object?
And after years of extensive investigations and interviews with alien abductees by Bud Hopkins and John Mack, who wrote books on the phenomenon, they concluded that there was more to the abduction experience than mere hallucination or sleep paralysis.
Okay, like what? Actual aliens? Something more does not mean aliens. I see no evidence of alien abductions here. I see a claim supported by nothing but anecdotes.
In addition, public coalitions such as the Disclosure Project have brought forth a large pool of high-ranking government, military, and intelligence officials and insiders, over 400 currently, who have confessed to personal knowledge of government involvement with UFOs and extraterrestrial technology, and the cover-ups and secrecy surrounding it.
Again, these are claims, not evidence. The plural of anecdote is anecdotes, not data. No, not even if it comes from government officials.
Nevertheless, pseudo-skeptics who claim to only want evidence continue to declare that there is no evidence when they get plenty of it from credible sources.
Okay, stop. Nothing you present is evidence. Nothing you present is verifiable. All you do is cite irrelevant studies and anecdotes.
They will even deny evidence from scientific experiments as well. All the while they tout, show me the evidence, where's the evidence? Yet when they are shown the evidence, they merely dismiss it or ignore it, acting as though they heard nothing, then go back to repeating that there's no evidence.
Evidence. Yeah, in the immortal words of Inigo Montoya, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Argument 9. Science is the only reliable method. Stated as, the only reliable way to know about anything is through the scientific method. All other methods are unreliable.
And the straw army grows ever greater, I see. Science is the only reliable method for studying the nature of the actual world in which we exist. It is not a reliable method for studying mathematics, logic, philosophy, or the humanities, for example. But since claims of the paranormal are claims about phenomena that supposedly exist in the actual world we live in, they can only be reliably studied by means of comparing the theoretical model of the phenomenon with the phenomenon itself. That's called science.
To study a phenomenon without actually comparing your findings with the phenomenon itself is called speculation.
This statement is usually made by skeptics who glorify and worship science as their god, even though they would never put it in those terms due to the connotations of them. 1. First, this is an absolutist statement since there is not just one single way to know everything.
No one says otherwise.
Other ways of knowing things include direct observation, personal experience, textbooks and articles, and advice from those who are wiser and more experienced than us.
Then you have a different understanding of the word knowing than I do, as you, by your own admission, think that you can say you know something if you've read it in a textbook. That means if you read a psychology textbook from the 50s, you know that homosexuality is a mental disorder, even though it has later been realized that this assessment was incorrect. Also, if you mishear what someone says, and this can be verified by listening to a recording of it, you still know that he said what he evidently didn't say because you experienced it, and you regard personal experience as a way to know something.
There are countless real things I can experience that don't need to be proved by the scientific method.
Okay, I'm assuming we're talking about facts about the world and not logical theorems or something like that. So, name one.
For instance, I can see rainbows by direct observation even though I can't bring them back to scientists, though they can see them too if they chose to go look.
So in other words, you know it's there because the observation is repeatable.
I can learn parenting through the experience of being a parent and swimming by the experience of going into the water.
And how do you know that your idea of good parenting works? By comparing your model of it with the observed results, right? And how do you know that your idea of how to swim works? By testing it, right? I'm still waiting.
Marketers and businesses learn the marketability of their products through surveys.
Are you even trying?
We can also learn valuable things from wiser and more experienced people, too, despite the fact that we didn't use any scientific method to check them out.
But we don't know those things. I'm still waiting for an example of something we know about the real world that we can know to be true without making repeatable observations.
In addition, I can't prove where I was yesterday either with a scientific method, but that doesn't mean that any claim of where I was yesterday is false.
That's not what anyone says.
Neither can I prove what I dreamed last night with a scientific method either, but that doesn't mean I don't know what I dreamed about.
Actually, you don't know. You remember. Since you can't compare your memory to the actual event or test whether the model in your mind is practically useful, you have no way of knowing that your memory is accurate. You know what you remember because you can recheck your memory, but you don't know that you remember correctly.
Likewise, if acupuncture or some alternative medicine technique works for me, then I know that it works for me regardless of whether it's proven by the scientific method or not.
No, you don't. Correlation does not imply causation. To establish a likely causal relationship, you need, at the very least, a mechanism and a sample size that can provide a statistically reliable result.
2. Second, since successful psi experiments have been achieved in tests conducted under the scientific method,
That's still not true, no matter how many times you say it.
where these closed-minded skeptics make the mistake is in seeking proof from scientific experiments, which they invalidate anyway when they don't get the results they want, rather than from direct experience, which is the ultimate true validation.
That's just plain stupid. By that reasoning, stage magicians really have magic powers. I know it because I've seen it myself. Even knowing how the trick is done and being able to reproduce it myself can't change what I saw. Hell, if you genuinely believe that experience outweighs evidence, you must believe that your dreams are true, even after you wake up.
Now, I don't dispute that science is an effective way of collecting knowledge, testing theories, or discovering how things work.
Yes, actually you just did. When you said that personal experience is a better way of knowing things than by looking at objectively verifiable evidence, you completely rejected the scientific method. See ya.